Good evening, everybody. My name's Christine Heath, and on behalf of the Word for Word National Non-Fiction Festival and the Geelong Regional Library, I'd like to welcome you to this special preview event. The Geelong Regional Library Corporation acknowledges the Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar original owners of the lands on which our library services operate and our festival runs. We pay respects to the Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar elders, past, present and emerging. We acknowledge and celebrate First Nations people of this land as the custodians of learning, literacy, knowledge and story. The Word for Word Festival is a unique annual literary event showcasing non-fiction writing in all its many facets, and this is the festival's 7th year. I'm a very proud member of the Word for Word Advisory Committee, and I'm excited to be involved in the festival again this year, but this year it'll take an entirely different standpoint. We're going to be online over 3 days from November the 20th to Sunday, November the 22nd. The theme is life changing, and isn't that a theme for our times? The full program will be announced on the 1st of October, and while I can't divulge any of the lineup just yet, I can say it's full of hard-hitting topics and thought-provoking presenters like tonight. To find out more about the Word for Word Festival, I encourage you to sign up for the festival e-newsletter, and we'll send out a link after this event. Now I have the great pleasure of introducing our special guests this evening who work all in the genre of true crime. We've got the journalist Rachael Brown, author Vikki Petraitis and our facilitator Meshel Laurie. I'll now hand you over to Meshel for what I'm sure will be a fascinating discussion.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christine. Hello and welcome to this event. What an exciting event it is. I mean, if there was a woman of the moment, it would have to be the woman who was unnamed for such a very long time. The woman who was a mystery to most of us. However, I'm going to tell you a secret. She wasn't a mystery to at least one of our panelists, and I know that for sure. Maybe she wasn't a mystery to either of them. Please welcome them into your homes. Vikki Petraitis and Rachael Brown. Hello, ladies.
Hello.
Hi, how are you going?
I'm great. Now, Vikki Petraitis, I know for sure that you knew who Lawyer X was well before I did. What about you, Rachael? Did you know who Lawyer X was?
No, and interestingly, I covered one of her big clients, Tony Mockwell's cocaine trial in 2006 when he absconded. So I had a bit to do with Nicola Gobbo back then. Obviously, no one knew at the time that she was moonlighting as a police informer.
Well, for those of you who don't know why these two ladies are now experts in the field of Lawyer X, Nicola Gobbo, it's because Vikki Petraitis, you wrote a book with a man called Paul Dale, who is inextricably linked with Nicola Gobbo for the rest of their lives, whether they like it or not. We'll get to why, all the reasons why. But you are linked with Paul because you wrote a book about his life. Can you tell us the title, please? It's a long one, but it makes sense. What is it?
Cops, Drugs, Lawyer X and Me.
Yes, and he has the unfortunate title of disgraced former drug squad detective Paul Dale, which I know he hates, but I sort of, you can't not really, can you? Because that's one of those titles that sums up an entire backstory, and it lets all of our viewers know exactly why you wrote a book about him and where he may fit into the Nicola Gobbo story. Although it hardly covers it, does it?
Yeah, no. And to be honest, I hadn't really heard about him. I didn't know who he was. When he got in touch with me back in 2012, I had to Google him because I don't know about you, Meshel, but when I've been writing true crime for forever, but I guess I had never gone really near gangland or drug squad. It really wasn't an area that I was interested in. All of the stuff that I had done were, like the Frankston serial killer and the effect on the community and families. And it was, all of my books really have been about people and people in the community caught up in terrible things. And I guess, I had read, I think, a couple of the Underbelly books, but really wasn't terribly interested. And so when he approached me first, I kind of Googled him and went, oh, okay. So I was starting from scratch. I had to Wikipedia, like all the names.
It is interesting because you are like a true crime writer from way back. You're a true crime queen. And the fact that you didn't know who he was is really interesting. And you found the human interest story in him through the salaciousness, you know. I did know who he was because I have always been fascinated by the drug war, the underbelly stuff. And Rachel, you are the presenter of Trace, the podcast series. And I found it interesting that you decided to go with Nicola Gobbo because the first series of Trace was against such a heartfelt family story. It was about an unsolved murder. It was about the first case that Ron Iddles was ever the lead homicide detective of. And in a terrible, ironic twist, it remained unsolved for his entire glittering career. And I'm going to say, in large part because of your podcast, there is going to be another inquest into that case. And congratulations again on that. And so I was fascinated that you became fascinated with Nicola Gobbo. I did not see that coming. So how did that happen?
A couple of things. So the fact that, so the word disgrace that you just attached to Paul Dale, and everyone listening will understand if you're a lover of words and books and stories and storytelling, words hold a lot of power and can do a lot of damage. And as Paul Dale would argue, the fact that that disgrace got attached to him will haunt him for the rest of his life. I was interested in Nicola Gobbo because I felt like, this is before I reached out to her to be involved in the second podcast, that she had become almost a caricature, that she wasn't a real person. We heard she was a slut, a narcissist, a treacherous bitch. You know, she snorted cocaine with her clients, she slept with cops, and all these words and these ideas were attached to her. But I was interested. I'm like, oh, we've never heard from her. You know, I wonder how she would respond to this. And I don't know whether that was me as a journalist or me as a woman, or me as someone interested in the gangland era. And I was fascinated by why. And that was the first question on the TV interview that ran in December. Why would someone who she was on track to be, you know, a QC, an SE, why would someone gamble that their livelihood and their life potentially taking on these dangerous criminals? So I wanted to hear it from her. And I think that that's really important. And there'd be a lot of people that I think might be critical of me. And I have read some reviews saying that, you know, I've let the podcast lets her play the victim. I was interested in hearing her story because we hadn't heard her story yet before the ABC got her. So the podcast pretty much does what it says on the tin, that it's her story in her words. But we also obviously tried to round that out with people who would have spoken against her. That was really tricky too, because, you know, certain crims, cops and lawyers would sledge her to me and I'd be like, great, okay, this is good, I need this, let's tape it. And they'd be like, oh, no, want nothing to do with it. So it was really hard getting a well-rounded perspective of her, but I still think it was really important to tell her story. And I had massive second album fears after Trace 1.
Yeah, I bet.
And that probably might answer your question about why I changed tack, because I kind of thought I'm a perfectionist, very stubborn, to my own detriment. And I just thought, God, to beat Trace 1 that had sparked a new inquest, I'm going to have to maybe solve it, like solve the next one. And I didn't really want to go in after being exhausted after Trace 1 with that kind of pressure on my shoulders. So it was a mixture of those two things marinating me, thinking, well, how do I raise the bar? And so I thought maybe it's better that I change tack, kind of like what Serial did. And I changed tack to this because I thought, you know what, Maria James was an easy woman to like.
Yes.
Obviously, you know, everyone was sympathetic to that. So this was more of a challenge for me as a journalist, not because I wanted people to like Nicola Gobbo, definitely not. She did a lot of things. She's to blame for a lot of things, undeniably. But I wanted listeners to see the person behind the punchline.
And don't forget, by the way, if you're watching this conversation, that we would love to hear your questions for both Vikki and Rachel. Rachel, I must admit that the first couple of episodes, I was getting wild. I was wild. I was saying to myself, what is Rachel doing? Why are you letting this woman just talk her crap? Because
Right, okay.
by that stage, I was firmly in the camp of everything that comes out of her mouth is rot. She's a liar. I mean, you know, you mentioned your reporting partner, Josie, a lot. And I know that Josie was even featured in the Royal Commission, in as much as, you know, one of the men that Nicola claims to have been sleeping with back in the day, who went on to have a big career in the Victoria Police. She was emailing Josie in 2010 saying, I've never met the guy, don't know any, you know, don't know him, but then later claimed to have had an affair with him. But then I started thinking later along the lines of what you're saying tonight, that, well, hang on, there's actually plenty of people presenting that story. And what I've never actually heard is Nicola's version of all of these events, her story. And it's valuable in terms of the discourse, right? And certainly, Vikki, I'm also intrigued by the fact that I know the two of you have had a great relationship for a long time. You are friends and you've respected each other's work for a long time and you've supported each other for a long time. And now here you are, because I know that, Vikki, you've been really passionate in presenting Paul Dale's version of events, who's another person who most people say, don't listen to a word that comes out of his mouth. He's full of it. And here's Vikki Petraitis saying, well, you know what? I'm actually going to present some arguments that I believe have never been presented before. So I'm wondering, in reading and listening to each other's work, have you found information about each other's subjects that you had never heard before? Because they call each other liars. They are bound in a number of scenarios in which they are diametrically opposed and they are calling each other liars on some really important issues.
Yeah, I think Rach and I have known each other for a long time, and I don't think, Rach, you knew that I ghost wrote the first book, did you? Because I remember it didn't seem like that long ago that you rang and go, did you ghost write that book?
Yeah.
So, and I thought it was really important for the first book to, it was in his words, and I thought that he needed to have that book for him. And all along, I think, for me, it was never about these salacious details. And I was really careful in the book and in my own research that I didn't ever want it to be about whether they had an affair. And I think this is because it doesn't really, it wasn't relevant. And I think even just I was watching again that Sky special on her, and you've got all these men talking about her, and she's the, I think they called her the puppeteer. And you've got, she slept with so-and-so and she was this and she was that. And I just think, oh, for goodness sake, this is about so much more. And I thought there's going to be a whole lot of largely men, I don't know, you might agree, Rach, but largely men judging her for sexual activity. This is about, and it was always about, Victoria Police using unscrupulous and unethical methods to gain convictions. And that was why I wanted to take on Paul's story, because for me it was always about, if they did this to him, if they paid off witnesses, if they offered people no sentence or a life sentence like they did with Terry Hodson, what would people say? And so for me it was always about the process. So if Rachel thinks that Nicola slept with Paul twice and Paul's admitted once, that was never going to be an issue.
No, but there are very much more important details than that at stake. I mean, for one thing, Paul contends that he was receiving legal advice from Nicola. She says, no, it never was. And that's a really crucial point in terms of his life and the way his life has panned out, because if she recorded him while giving him legal advice and then passed that recording on to police, well, that's a very important breach that has happened to him.
Yeah, and I think
she says that never happened. So it's not just salaciousness.
Yeah, I think with Paul's story, it was always when he was the lone voice, as he was when the book came out in 2013, he was the lone voice saying, what happened to me, the process of what happened to me was just plain wrong. And when Lawyer X came out and I remember being at work, because I'm a teacher, so I'm very removed from the real world. As you know, schools, we close the door and it's a different world. And I remember the girl who sits near me in my office, and she's like, oh, Vic, who do you think Lawyer X is? And I went, it's Nicola Gobbo. And then, of course, it was Nicola Gobbo. I was like, how did you know? I thought everyone would know. But I think when it became such a much, much bigger story affecting so many people, I said to Paul, I think now your story has a context. And at that point, you were the lone voice saying, this isn't fair and it's not right the way Victoria Police acted. And then all of a sudden, he was one of many saying the same thing. So for me, that's what it was about. That's always been at the core of this story, is that if we live in a system that is supposed to be as fair as it can be and just, and what I saw happen to him, and that book was never written about, it wasn't him saying to me, and this is what happened. He came to me right at the start and he had a ute full of boxes and he just said, you read it and you decide, you tell me what you think. And the minute you start reading it, you know, I think I sat there going, oh my God, no, they couldn't have done that. And so really it wasn't, it was an examination of the documentation that as a citizen, I was shocked. And that's what hopefully the book reflects.
And I think, Rachel, you mentioned something a moment ago that really requires discussion, and that is the difference in reportage when it comes to Nicola as a woman. And just in researching for this conversation, I found a report in the Herald Sun from earlier this year in which there's an issue in the Paul Dale story about a burner phone. And I won't go into why it's important because it's very complicated, but, you know, a burner phone, of course, is a phone that we have that isn't attached to our names that we can use for various purposes. Now, some people believe that that was attached to a murder, actually. But Paul Dale says, oh, no, I had a burner phone so that I could have affairs with police women. That's his sort of alibi for having the burner phone. And I've only ever heard that story once. And I had to go digging for that story and read it once in a story from the Herald Sun this year. Nicola, on the other hand, has this constant narrative, doesn't she, about her sex life. And as you said earlier, about she's a slut. She had an affair with this one, with that one, and it went for this long and it was this many times. And let's talk about that, about the difference in reportage and the effect that it has.
Yeah, I noticed that a lot, but I didn't want to be, I did worry about taking this on because, and some people have actually said that in reviews, that of course, you know, you defend her because you're a female journalist at the ABC. And I find that really offensive. I'm not an apologist for Nicola Gobbo. I think she stuffed up. I think she had exits and she didn't take them. You know, and I'm sorry to be crass, but I'm not going to defend a person just because I'm a woman and she's a woman, so therefore I'll jump to her defence.
But we can't ignore that either. That disparity is extraordinary, and you cannot read a story about her without reference to her sex life.
And I did a count, and in the early days, when all this stuff about her sleeping with cops, I counted 5 cops in the space of 8 years. So it's hardly a deluge.
Yeah.
And cops that have got in the witness stand, I know for a fact, have had affairs, you know, with other lawyers or journalists, and that was never brought up. So there is an imbalance there. But I also think, and you might find this interesting, that she's such a bolshy character and can be so on the nose that I think that worked in the police's favour a bit, because she took all the attention and she was like, you know, with a magician and misdirection and look over here and you don't see what's going on. She was that look over here, you know, she was the misdirection and her sex life. And so I think she's been, again, I'm not saying she's blameless. She's got a lot to be sorry for. But I think that helped that, you know, people who were also to blame were just rubbing their hands together going beauty, like the attention's on that, when, you know, this did not happen in isolation. One woman cannot corrupt an entire justice system. Her use was facilitated by Victoria Police. It was encouraged by Vic Pol. So we need to be talking about that. So
Absolutely.
I'm actually really glad. Thanks for telling me that you were yelling at me at the start. It's nice to hear, but I'm glad that, because I knew this would be a slow burn, this podcast, for people to work out what I'm doing. And I wanted that vacillation, because I've done that. I've been like, I feel a bit sorry for her here. And I was like, oh no, how could she do this? And I've vacillated the entire time. So that was what I tried to infuse in the podcast, that she's a very difficult human being to put in a pigeonhole.
But you're right. At the same time, I read today that Simon Overland has a new job. He's about to head to Tasmania to head up a council there. So muzzle tov. Stacey Bender, who is a viewer, has a question. She's asking, what is the ideal perfect outcome for the Royal Commission trial, all the people involved, including the corrupt police? Now, the reason I raised the name of Simon Overland is but he was the, at one time, he was the, well, my internet connection's unstable, I hope it hangs in, was Commissioner of Police, and he was very high in the hierarchy of police, and he was one of the people in the stand on a number of days when everyone was pointing fingers and saying, whose idea was this, and who was running this, and who was the most senior person to know about this? And I don't know if we even really got an answer about that. But certainly the Commissioner has said that no police will face charges, right, at the end of the Royal Commission.
So the Royal Commissioner, Margaret McMurdo, has said that she won't name anyone. Right. So this was really interesting. So Council Assisting wrote a 2,000-page gargantuan and blistering report into all of this. Quite impressive. And they did name names about people they suggested that the Commissioner could find may have committed criminal offences. And the Commissioner decided to redact all those names and said, it might prejudice potential future trials. Mm-hmm. So I can see it from her point of view, but to answer the viewer's question, makes it very tricky, because now who does it? Victoria Police probably won't investigate itself, and therefore then the next best thing is IBAC, the corruption watchdog. And IBAC has already come out and said, well, you even think about pursuing individual officers for potential criminal offences, we would need double our budget, and we would need souped up investigative resources and powers. So it's looking more and more unlikely that no charges will be laid. So then what have you got? You've got a $40 million Royal Commission paid for by taxpayers, and that's not including the Victoria Police Bill, the money that they've spent on lawyers and documents and all that jazz. So I'm really sorry, I can't give you an answer, because I'm struggling with it myself. I actually don't know what will happen, if anything.
And I always think about the human cost. Obviously, we have, people like Nicola Gobbo, her children, Paul Dale, his family, the Hodson family, Mandy Hodson, Anthony Hodson, Nikki Hodson, their children. Their parents were murdered in their TV room. Clearly, there was a cock up. They were very deeply involved in the police and in the program of as informants, and they have no answers about what happened there. It's an unsolved, theoretically, and there's still no closure around any of that for any of those people.
There are no winners.
There are no winners
in this. And I think this is what is really sad about this case, is that the handling all along has almost guaranteed, how can they go back now, and how can they go back now fresh? It's just been so corrupted in every way that will they ever get answers? I don't think they will.
Well, I guess we still have to go through the process of the people who are now appealing their convictions. How long do you think that will take, that process?
That's anyone's guess. I think there are 8 men at the moment appealing their convictions. A couple of them are coming up for bail out soon. They want to be allowed out while they appeal. That's a lot of money. And then some of these guys will then try to sue the state of Victoria. I was talking to Vikki earlier about this, actually. There's a guy called Simon Illingworth, a corruption whistleblower, And he did an interview with Josie Taylor, my colleague, and he said something really interesting. He's like, well, they deserve compensation. You know, even if they've, like, a lot of people might think that they've done the things that they're in jail for, but if they haven't been given a fair defence and a fair hearing and gone through the system correctly, Simon Illingworth said, in my mind, they are innocent and they deserve compensation.
Yeah.
It's going to cost Victoria a lot of money and a lot of time.
And what a great time for Victoria to have this problem to spend money on. John Cleary is one of our viewers, and he asks, is there any difference between Lawyer X's protestations and those of criminal Catholic Church priests and brothers? Specifically, pedophile priest Vince Ryan on Revelation, in that they both seemingly refuse to admit their criminality, which is a very complicated question with many, many, many levels. I don't even really know where to begin with that question, but I guess, is Nicola, has she been convicted of any crimes? Not that I know of.
I think it's, again, I think if you put that question, if you say Nicola Gobbo is in the same category as a pedophile or a pedophile denier, I think, again, that, and Rachel knows more about this than me because you sat there for the Royal Commission for that year, but I think when you've got so many people all acting outside of the law for their noble corruption or however they wanted to justify it, and I think then to say it's all Nicola, I think is underestimating the breadth of this, and I think that Nicola needs to stand alongside all of those senior police officers that were there all the time, all along, having weekly meetings about this. And again, Rach, you hit the nail on the head when you said they're all getting promoted. And where's she?
Well, not only that, I firmly believe that at least one senior homicide detective was ultimately left Victoria Police because she believed that he knew that she was informing, and he didn't. But I believe that she was rattled and that she orchestrated or certainly was part of orchestrating his leaving. You know, so not only were other police, you know, being promoted, but great cops were leaving because of this shenanigans, because they weren't in the tent. They didn't know what was going on, and so they weren't included, and they ultimately left.
That is another sad thing, that a lot of them are so bitter. You know,
yes.
Two of the most blistering statements at the Royal Commission that I've read are from Sol Solomon and Cam Davey, two lead investigators on Petra. Sol Solomon is still serving, so for him to have written that statement while still serving, I was kind of in awe, actually, that he was brave enough to do that. But Cam Davey, I think, is now with IBAC, I think. But he wrote an equally blistering statement basically saying that Victoria Police, in trying to in trying to hide its use of Nicola Gobbo, effectively nobbled the Hodson murder investigation and nobbled any chance that those Hodson kids will have of justice. And that's
absolutely,
it's one of the most powerful lines of the Royal Commission in my book.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, where to do you think from here for Victoria Police? It's been a really bruising affair for them, hasn't it? And that's a real shame for them. And I know they have a new commissioner, but it's going to be a very difficult road back.
It's a really, really tough one because I've got mates who are cops. I've chatted with them, some who worked in that era. And Josie, there was a line in the last episode when I was chatting to my colleague Josie, and she's right. She said, this is just the same. A lot of them genuinely thought they would, and still think they were doing the right thing. They thought they were trying to solve crime. Nicola thought she was helping. I know this sounds bizarre, and I'm not an apologist for her, but I do think they all genuinely believed that they were doing the right thing. But you look at these two parties now, and Nicola Gobbo is on the run with her children back in hiding, and they'll never have a normal life. And that's her fate, and that's her price. And I, for the record, I don't know where in the world she is, and neither does her lawyer. But police who were involved, as Vikki mentioned, you know, they've moved on with their life, they're getting promotions. There probably won't be any criminal investigations. It still seems inequitable. And yes, they've apologised as a force, and they say it was, you know, it was a systemic issue, and it wasn't any individual officer at fault. And they also say procedures have changed and this could happen, never happen again. I really struggle with that, because we just have to take its word, right? Like, there could be other lawyers that are informers that we'll never know about, who have their own particular set of, like, it will be a completely different story. Like, one woman, so much money is being spent on a Royal Commission on one woman, when every informer has a different set of, you know, procedures that cops are following.
Well, am I the only person who feels like I feel like I keep reading and hearing hints that she's not the only one? I mean, that's...
She is, or she like, when I interviewed her, she said she knew of 2 others. So are we going to have $50 million Royal Commission into both of them? I can't see, this is my personal opinion, I can't see how lessons from her can then be applied. Like, each has their own specific merits, I would assume.
Can I play devil's advocate, as I generally do in this conversation, and try and really, really take us all back to that time and place, though? Because I do think that with this space, we tend to forget as a community how intense that time was and how frightening that time was. And particularly when we reached that point when Jason Moran was shot dead in Tarago at Auskick, in front of not only his children, but hundreds of other children and families. And the pressure that was on Victoria Police and on the state government to make this stop, you know, there's part of me that can understand the, you know, ends justifies the means mentality.
Oh, totally.
You know,
it's so easy for us to look back in hindsight and judge. It's so easy for me to judge. I completely, you know, put my hand up to that. There was a really great witness in the Royal Commission called Paul Rowe, and he basically said, we're damned if we do, damned if we don't, because if we found out about a $15 million ecstasy import and we did nothing about it, there'd be an inquiry as to why we potentially let hundreds of people die from ecstasy. So you're right, Meshel. They were struggling and they were losing, and they needed a secret weapon, and that was her.
Paul Rowe's evidence was fascinating, wasn't it? Because he was saying, you know, he got that information from Nicola Gobbo about the world's biggest ecstasy hall. Remember that, coming into Melbourne? And he was like, what, am I meant to ignore that because it's coming, because she's breaking her vow or her sort of, you know, ethical position? He's like, that's not my problem. I'm not letting down her clients. That's, you know, and I really related to what he was saying. He's like, I'm a copper. Shouldn't I act on whatever information I get? And Vikki, we have this conversation, it seems like over and over again, about drug squad detectives and how they can so easily, and we're not speaking specifically about Paul Dale, but drug squad detectives time and time again can end up in trouble. And there seems to be a lot of reasons for that, but one of them tends to be, it's a very tricky world to navigate, and you're trying to get information a lot of the time from people who work in the drug industry, right?
Yeah, I think that was part of Paul's problem, was as a detective, and not just in the drug squad, but as a detective, that promotion was based on how many, you know, how many informants that you could source and get on the books. So it's part of their job to go out and meet with all sorts of people and try and get intel from them. That's where you got it. But going back to your point, the end justifies the means, and I've heard that over and over again by serving police officers and as an, you know, as an excuse, or
that's the noble corruption idea, right?
And I actually say, okay, well, let's unpack this. The end justifies the means. What is the end? And as Rach pointed out, this has cost $40 million just for the Royal Commission. Now, I thought I was being kind of overly generous when I estimated in the book that this will cost the taxpayer all up, including the Royal Commission. At that stage, the budget was $30 million, that it will cost us $50 million, and it will release prisoners that may or may not have done what they were convicted of into the community. So when you start hearing the end justifies the means, ask yourself, what is the end? Because the end is a circus a very expensive circus where I think, can we trust the people at the top? And I think that's going to be an issue for all of us. Can you trust Victoria Police? I mean, and I've got friends that are in the police force too, and they are amazing people, but
is there an argument, Vikki, is there an argument that we've almost overshot the runway, that the end could have been effectively the end of the gang war, and effectively it did end, and, you know, we could have left it at that, essentially, and nobody needed to know all of this stuff was the back end of how that happened. And she did, and the people who are in jail, can't they be there? Weren't they bad people doing bad things?
But we don't know, and we have these processes.
Don't we?
Like when Margaret McMurdo opened the Royal Commission, and she said a few really, really good things. One, she said when people can consult a lawyer, whether they pay, whether as a friend, and I thought that's specifically for including Paul. Yeah. But, you know, she talks about we have these processes for a reason, because they have been judged the fairest and tested year after year. And it is up to no one to come along and say, well, you know, I mean, a lawyer isn't supposed to dog on her clients, but the end justifies the means. And it's like, you've got to get them fair and square or not at all. And I think we've all had convictions where, you know, the public, not knowing half the information, has gone, oh, that's a bad conviction and he was definitely guilty. But it's like we have these processes, and if they are elastic, then everyone's in danger. We would, and I know, Rachel, that, you know, that your last episode of the podcast, and wondering whether or not police could bug a phone without a proper warrant, or whether they could spy on. I certainly had times when I was working on Paul Dale's book where I heard really strange clickings on my phone. I had some really weird experiences where my sister, who was living with us at the time, she thought she heard us come home from work and called out, and then she heard the door downstairs close. And, you know, I don't know what was happening, but would it surprise me if I was under surveillance? Not at all. And I think that, you know, can they overstep marks? Could they bug my phone? I'm the most boring person ever, and they wouldn't get anything, but did they? And I think we need to trust in our police force. And at the moment, I think working on this story really rattled my trust. And I've been writing positive police stories for 25 years about all the wonderful work that they do, but this is not one of them.
No, well, you can both attest to the fact that through this process, we've discovered that to protect the secret of Nicola Gobbo being an informant, a lot of things were done that we would never have believed would have been done. Things happened that we would never have believed, right? What's shocked you, Rachel? What's left you shook?
What we were just talking about, actually, I was just trying to find a note in my little notepad, and I found it, and I made a note to myself, and Vikki was touching on this then. It's, you know, it's easy for us as a society to look at it and say, well, you know, they're gangland, they're thugs, it's no big deal. But the minute you accept that blurs the line for everyone else. Mm-hmm. You know, it robs the Hodson kids of justice for their family. And that is the worry, that in their desperation that police possibly started behaving like the people that they're trying to stop, you know. So once we start accepting that blurred lines, as Vikki said, it has trickle down effects for society. And yes, some of those people might deserve to be in jail, but we need to play by our system, right? That's our rule of democracy. That's our fundamental tenet, that everyone deserves the right to a fair trial. And I don't think you can mess with that. And I'm pretty unapologetic about that. And some of these guys were very dangerous criminals, but yeah, you just can't mess with the start, because it's then what about if you're charged with a crime, Meshel, and, you know, and cops bend the rule a little bit, and, you know, it's like boiling a frog. You know, you just get that, you know, death by degrees.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know there are plenty of people who think I'm a bad person, and but there are plenty of people who think I'm not. So it's like, who is the judge? It just depends on who you get on the day, doesn't it? So that's why we need actual written down laws, not just a person who gets to reckon it. Jodie Skinner would like to know, Rachel, if you've heard from Nicola during the process. No, you don't know if she's listening, or you haven't heard any feedback.
No, so as I said in the podcast, the last time I heard from her, the last time she called me was around the time that's in the last episode, when she was going through customs, when she came back into Australia in Brisbane. And then the eerie time, their potential phone interception in her lawyer's office, that was early this year. And so that was, I thought, well, great, I can, put some questions to her lawyer, fill in some gaps. So no, not since then. And that was very strange. The phone line cut out. And then her lawyer, Tim Tobin, went across to check if she'd emailed him to say, oh, my phone's died or something like that. And there was an email from her saying, I think they know who you have there, as in me and Josie in his chambers. That freaked me out. You were asking me if anything, that really, not to be melodramatic, but that gave me chills. And then his computer died. It just crashed. Went back to factory settings, choose your language, Spanish, Italian. His PA said she'd never seen anything like it before. It was asking for his office database codes. And this is a Vic Bar computer. So that was really worrying. And I walked away and I thought, have I been doing this for too long? Am I paranoid? Am I jumping to conclusions? And this is exactly what the Royal Commission was about, police interfering in that sacred lawyer-client communication. So I went home and I thought, no, it just must be a terrible coincidence. But Tim Tobin reached out to his IT technician, who said that it looked like his computer had been accessed and shut down remotely. And that to me I found that quite chilling. So I didn't get to put any questions to her that day, and that was early this year. Tim Tobin reached out to Victoria Police and said, have you been interfering with my communications? And they, to give them a right of reply, it called him back and said, no, it wasn't us. We can't do anything like that. So that day is still a mystery to me.
John Cleary, who is watching, says the just a few bad eggs excuse offered time and time again in every failure of governance, banking, aged care, to cover the rotten culture which survives despite royal commissions and the halo effect being removed temporarily. Now, I think what he's getting there, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, but I think maybe is the idea that this sort of, the royal commissions give the impression that they've had a big broom and swept away the bad eggs. But then, we can have this lingering worry that, I don't know, have you? When there's not sort of doesn't feel like there's some firm closure to come out of these things sometimes. I mean, you've both sort of commented on that, about your hopes.
It was from the top down. This was the first time we had a scandal. I think we're always a bit smug in Victoria because New South Wales seemed to have so many different scandals, and we had our window shutters. Remember that? Operation Bart, and people were, claiming kickbacks for broken windows or something like that. And it was like, gee, if that's the worst Victoria Police can do compared to what other people could do. And I think when this hit, it wasn't a couple of bad eggs in a in a police station, or it wasn't a particular CIB or the drug squad. This came from the very top, the highest office in the police force, and people, Overland knew, Ashton knew, Cornelius knew. They all were, a party to what went on, and none of them. I think Ron Eddles seemed to be the only one that just went, hold on a minute. No, this is wrong. I don't care why you're doing it. This is wrong. This is dangerous. And I think that's, whether it's a culture, I don't know. And as we said before, a lot of those people are being promoted. So I don't know that they're sweeping out. Nicola seems to be the one that's suffering here.
I don't think she's the only one. I think we've mentioned a few other people who have continue to be vilified, frankly, for their not joining the club sufficiently.
And it is, you raise an interesting point there, that I've just had a mental blank, but the culture of towing a line. One particular thing that I heard at the commission really stuck with me, and the days could be quite drab, so if something stuck, it was quite poignant. And it was Tony Biggin, and he was running at the time the source unit that looked after informers, and he said that Officer Black, which is a pseudonym, who did the report into whether or not Nicola should be turned into a witness, so private informer into a public witness to testify against Paul Dale. And he said, no, bad idea, could lead to a death, could expose our secrets, could expose methodology. And Biggin was saying that he, in the end, had to then stick up for Tony Biggin, because he said if he submitted a report like that, and if Sandy White did, another key handler, they would have a black mark against their name for the rest of their career. Yeah. And all the journalists kind of, that stuck with me, because I thought, God, this is someone, and the counsel assisting picked up on that. He was like, hang on, so he will have a black mark against his name for warning Victoria Police that their informer could be murdered. And Biggin said, yes, he would have. So I felt nervous for him having to hand over that report, so I stuck up for him, and that's telling in an organisational perspective. I think that officers feel like they can't speak up. It's get on the train or get under it, I think, was Simon Illingsworth's view of that. And he thinks that culture still persists today.
I think so. And I think some retired police are still suffering from that culture today, frankly. We are almost running out of time. So if you would like to submit a question, please do. Now, what else do we have? An anonymous attendee. It sounds like it's going to be a really juicy question, but it's not for anonymous. It's just I don't know the full details of the Nicola Gobbo story, but from what I've seen, she appears to always want to portray herself as a victim. No doubt there is some truth to this, but she doesn't appear to take any responsibility for her own misdeeds. What's your sense of her in this regard? And obviously, Rachel, you're the person who's spent the most time not only with her, but certainly just listening to her. You must have heard her telling her stories 100 times by the time you've gone through the process of editing and putting this thing together. So do you get any sense of the level of responsibility that she accepts in this?
I'm really torn on this one. She probably doesn't accept enough, but she does accept some to a lot. She's admitted that she passed on privileged information. I feel like with her, and I've been criticised for this, there's always a but. Yes, I did this, but it was related to a future crime, so I was allowed to do it. Or yes, I did this, but someone could have died. Or yes, I did this, but cops kept circling and coming back and wanted more and more and more. I wanted to pull back and they kept using me. So there's always
a threatened to take my children. This is controversial, but I must admit, in that episode, I thought, well, yeah, I sort of understood that surely there is an argument for at least investigating the safety of her children. I mean, she is in hiding from, she says, Victoria Police, but certainly from gangland figures, right? I mean, she's been messing with Calabrians, for crying out loud. Like, isn't there, if she refuses police protection, she says it's because she doesn't feel safe in that environment. But surely for police, isn't there an argument to say, listen, if we have a witness in this situation and we're offering her witness protection, she won't take it and she has small children, we have to call investigators in to see if the children are safe with her. Yeah, and I felt like in your episode you were backing her up in saying, oh, this is terrible to do this to a mother, but I'm at home doing my dishes in my kitchen as a mother thinking, well, nah, I think her children are in danger with her.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about this. So I hustled on this a lot. I don't have kids. Josy's got kids.
You don't need to have kids to think about this. I'm not saying that, by the way.
Yeah. Oh, no. I know you weren't suggesting that. Yeah. So, yes, this is really tricky because I would, on the face of it, yes, I would be worried about the kids because I would be worried about her. And then the more time I spent with her, she's like, she doesn't feel in danger. she thinks that she's more useful to some of the criminals alive because she could be their ticket out of jail if they want to appeal their convictions. So she feels like she's more in danger from cops. So why should she join a program, a protection program that cops run? And then her argument is she feels like she'd be safer living in plain sight. And then she said to me, you know, at the height of the gangland war, when people like Carl Williams and Jason Moran were being actively hunted and shot at, that Victoria Police never interfered in those gangland families. You know, Vic Pol never said, perhaps we should take Jason Moran's kids away. And Jason Moran ended up getting shot in the front of that minivan with his 3 kids in the back. So then you come to, well, that's a good point. They never did that. And Josie's like, yeah, but that's also, to play devil's advocate, perhaps they should have, because they were in the car when he got shot. So it's a really tough one. And I just came back to, well, yes, Victoria Police, it doesn't sound like they did interfere in other families. So that did make me wonder whether she was right in thinking that they're just using them this time to, you know, they would prefer she's hidden away in silence so she can't say any more to embarrass them. It's a really, I can't give you a straight answer on this because it's really complicated.
And it's a really, I never even thought that far through it. That's a really interesting question. Why weren't they looking into those families? Because, yeah, it does seem obvious that those children were at risk, doesn't it?
And I guess, like, you, if someone said to you, it's just really tough. I don't know what I would do, whether I would stay and fight and risk losing my kids or whether I'd give in and go back into hiding. I feel really sorry for the kids and I feel sorry for the Hodson kids. And it's a good kind of juxtaposition of how intergenerational this gangland war is. You know, this happened 20 years ago. The Hodson kids are still suffering. Nicola's kids will never really know a normal childhood. That
conversation was one of those moments where, to my ears, I just thought, oh God, she's delusional. She's, you know, but you've helped me to accept that, you know what, I am really conditioned to listen to her that way. So you have helped me to understand that I have listened to years of descriptions of her and never had the opportunity to listen to her. So I think it's a really valuable document, this podcast, in that just as your book, Vikki, is a valuable document because we have heard so much about these people, and it's valuable to at least hear their versions and be able to make up our own minds. There's plenty about them, and there's plenty of testimony from other people about them.
I think that was why I'm so keen with Paul. Everyone had written about him in their book. So Christine Nixon had mentioned him in her book, and Charlie Bazina had mentioned him, and he was on the front page of the Herald Sun every day. And I just think everyone has the right to tell their story. And when you are silenced, whether you're male or female, when you are silenced, I think that's when I become interested, because if someone's trying to silence you or you don't reply, I think it's really important to give people a voice. And I think also it makes other people more careful because they never expect Nicola to have a voice. They didn't expect Paul Dale to have a voice. And unless they have a professional writer or professional journalist coming in and saying, okay, I will help you have a voice, they are silent. And I just think that what...
Vikki, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we have like 5 minutes left, and Anne has asked the best question, and it's a question that I always have as well about Paul. Vikki, I don't understand why Vic Pol was so ready to believe that Paul was guilty in relation to the drug house burglary. Now, for those of you who don't know the story, you kind of don't need to, but the point is that Paul Dale says that he was very victimised by Victoria Police, that he was a member of, and he's been accused of a lot of these crimes, right? And so I always have the same question for you, Vikki. Anne's question is, do you have any insights into what it is about Paul Dale that made him so vulnerable? Why did they accuse him of all these crimes?
He was there. And I think when they got Terry into a room, and a lot of people didn't know this, and I think it's important, and it is left out of a lot of reporting, is that when they got when they got Terry into the room, and they basically said, and I had the transcripts, you will go away for life over this unless you can give us a name. And so when Terry Hodson was looking at a life sentence and he would die in jail, or no sentence, he goes, a three-striper. Paul did it. And so all along, Paul feels like he has been bargained for, and these people were offered no sentence or a life sentence. It's a no-brainer. And he keeps saying, these are people that would sell their own grandmothers, or these are people that lived in a very different world. And do you name another name in exchange for no sentence? And I think, yeah, sure, they did. And so that is what he feels happened all along. The Victoria Police bargained and paid for information and statements from really, bad people.
This is a set of events that happened in sort of 2003, 2004, that a lot of people are still passionately divergent about, let's put it that way, in terms of what happened.
And never change.
No.
Never change.
But thank you both so much. This has been such a great event, and thank you so much to Geelong Library for putting this event on. Thank you to everyone who's joined us, because it's an incredible opportunity to have both of you together, both of you who are such meticulous workers in the way that you research and get to know your subjects, and for you to have chosen these two subjects, Paul Dale and Nicola Gobbo, is extraordinary. And I hope that you do lots of events together, because you've got lots to share for nerds like me who are like so into this story. So don't forget, you can hang around, and after this event, I believe, and buy the book, Vikki's book, and lots of other things. The book is in the library, Geelong Library. And of course, Rachael Brown's podcast Trace, you can catch up on the whole thing, and series 1 as well. And lots more to come from both of you. Thank you both so much. I'm Meshel Laurie, by the way. You can catch up. Thank you on Australian True Crime, my podcast, with lots of fascinating stuff like this. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Kaz, Tiffany, everybody. Thank you. We'll see you both soon. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.